How did a multi-billion-dollar company make a game that only 4 people bought? There's plenty that Sega would rather you forget about Sonic's janky past. Just about everyone remembers the other human girlfriend Sonic had at one point, also known as the furry princess. But besides that reputation-crushing instance Sega subtly endorsing bestiality, no one really associates Sonic the Hedgehog with human women. This means that hearing about Sonic's first human girlfriend might come as a surprise. This particular significant other never left the drawing board for obvious reasons that were later forgotten about and idiotically ignored during Sonic 06's development. But it doesn't change the fact that, albeit for a very short period of time, Sonic's fully canonical lady friend did exist. Her name was Madonna. No, not the Madonna, but a legally distinct Madonna who was a groupie interested in Sonic because he was the frontman of a rock band. That's right, before Sonic the Hedgehog made his big solo debut in 1991, he was slated to be a rock star with a human groupie girlfriend. Bullet status? Dodged. At least for the next 15 years anyway.
Help me! I'm dying! I can't swim.
Anytime Sonic goes underwater, it becomes one of the most stressful exercises in the franchise, forcing players to scramble to find air bubbles or reach the surface before their hero drowns. This is made all the more tense by the escalating music, played over a countdown as Sonic exhausts his last gasps of air and tries to avoid a watery grave. As it turns out, the origins of Sonic's inability to swim all sprung from a misunderstanding on the part of Sonic the Hedgehog lead programmer Yuji Naka. When developing the first game around Sega's planned mascot, Naka was under the assumption that hedgehogs were unable to swim. He then took that erroneous assumption and baked it into the mechanics of the game. Years later, Naka was surprised to learn that hedgehogs are indeed capable of swimming, although not as gracefully as other animals in the animal kingdom. By then, however, it was already firmly established that Sonic was a character with leaden feet, sinking to the bottom of any water source like a rock, striking the fear of imminent death into the hearts of players. In 1993, Sonic the Hedgehog was a bona fide gaming phenomenon, helping propel Sega to impressive heights worldwide as the company's marquee franchise. In order to extend the life cycle of the Sega Genesis and boost its processing power, Sega launched the Sega CD. To help promote this peripheral, Sega planned to launch a Sonic game for it, initially hoping to remaster a game to show off the technical upgrade before deciding to create an entirely new game instead. Sega originally wanted to remaster the original 1991 Sonic the Hedgehog under the title Super Sonic, with the project taking advantage of the Sega CD's capabilities to add new levels and cutscenes. As development on the project continued, it was decided to make the game its own unique experience, retitled Sonic CD. The developers would add a time travel mechanic and place a heightened emphasis on exploration. The 1993 game fulfilled Sega's desire to give the Sega CD its own Sonic title, continuing the franchise's dominance. The Sonic franchise has seen a whole lot of spin-offs, but one of the strangest of them all is the 1993's Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine for the Genesis. The title is a puzzle game in which colored blobs steadily descend as two players attempt to complete more lines and combos, which in turn create blocks to overwhelm their opponents. A staple in subsequent Sonic compilations for modern consoles, the game was first released to Japanese audiences with a vastly different narrative premise in place. The puzzle game that served as the basis for Mean Bean Machine was Puyo Puyo, a game that in turn made use of characters and environments from the fantasy franchise Madoka Monogatari. To better appeal to North American audiences for its 1993 release, the game was released using the designs from the 1993 animated series Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Much of Compile's previous source code for Puyo Puyo is still present in Mean Bean Machine's programming, just hiding beneath the reskinned characters.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Sega catapulted over the bar set by the original 1991 Sonic the Hedgehog with its 1992 sequel. The game featured more elaborate levels, a greater emphasis on speed, and the addition of Sonic's partner Tails. The game took Sonic from Oil Ocean to Mystic Cave zones and way up into space as he raced to stop Dr. Robotnik's latest twisted plot. However, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 initially planned to have an ambitious time-traveling premise, which may have seen Sonic venturing to both the past and future to combat Robotnik. Early designs from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 that have surfaced online have shown players a few glimpses of the game's original time travel narrative. According to Hardcore Gaming's 101's research, Casino and Chemical Plant zones were intended to take place in a dystopian future. where Hilltop Zone was planned to take place in the past, which finally explains the fire-breathing robot dinosaurs. The time travel component was eventually dropped for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but played a prominent role in 1993's Sonic CD. With Sonic the Hedgehog 2 being such a tremendous success for Sega, internal expectations were running high for a sequel to come out on time and maintain the franchise's momentum. However, it was becoming increasingly clear that Sonic the Hedgehog 3 could not effectively be completed in time for the 1993 holiday season. That's when Sega of America decided a stopgap title should be released in the interim. With a limited development window, Sega decided to proceed with a spin-off that became the pinball-themed Sonic Spinball. The pinball concept for the game solidified when Sega's marketing department identified Casino Night Zone as being one of the more popular levels in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The Sega Technical Institute developed Sonic Spinball in approximately 6 months to meet its planned holiday season launch. While it was successful in coming out on schedule, the developers were overall dissatisfied by the final version's relative lack of polish. The only original Sonic the Hedgehog game released for the Sega Saturn was 1997's Sonic R, a racing title that allowed players to control different Sonic characters through a variety of tracks. Though the gameplay shared many elements with contemporaries like Mario Kart, it also placed a prominent focus on exploration, as the characters set out to obtain the Chaos Emeralds. However, Sonic R began with a completely different premise entirely, with the development of the project starting out as a Formula One racing game.
I feel the need for speed.
Traveller's Tales, the British developer that had previously made Sonic 3D Blast, was approached by Sega to make a new Sonic title. The developers decided to repurpose its initial plans for a Formula One game, putting Sonic and his pals in place of the cars intended for the project. The original premise was also scaled back in a lot of ways due to time. Traveller's Tales completed the project in approximately 9 months, releasing Sonic R in time for the 1997 holiday season, though the completed game only contained 5 tracks. Sonic R wasn't intended to be the only new Sonic game released on the Sega Saturn, with a more traditional platformer planned to herald a new era for the franchise on the console. Sonic X-treme began development in late 1994, and was originally planned to be a side-scrolling title like past Sonic games. However, as development continued, the project shifted to a 3D platformer, and moved from the Sega 32X peripheral to the Saturn in 1995. Programming a game with then cutting-edge 3D gameplay proved to be more challenging than the development team anticipated, and internal politics at Sega hindered the project. The troubled production and delays led to long working hours for the team. Programmer Chris Coffin even contracted walking pneumonia, and designer Chris Sen similarly fell gravely ill. When faced with a demoralizing and severely ailing team, Sega quietly pulled the plug on Sonic X-treme in 1997, leaving the Saturn without its own mainline Sonic game. While the Sonic franchise had ventured into 3D spaces before, the series made its full foray into 3D platforming with the flagship Sega Dreamcast title Sonic Adventure in 1998. The Dreamcast tech allowed the development team to craft lush, immersive environments for Sonic to explore at breakneck speed. And since the team was working with significantly more powerful hardware, the developers decided to use the opportunity to redesign Sonic, creating the more modern iteration that fans are familiar with today. Lead character designer Yuji Uekawa was in charge of developing Sonic's look in Sonic Adventure. He looked for inspiration from Disney and Looney Tunes cartoons, as well as character work by Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama. Sonic's design was slimmed down from his previous models, while his arms and legs were extended to give the character a considerably lankier appearance. This redesign allowed Sonic to become more emotive in his movements and gave Sega's icon a look that would endure far longer than his original design. After years of expansive 3D platformers and action spin-offs, the Sonic franchise decided to go back to the basics with the 2010 game Sonic the Hedgehog 4. The sequel saw a return to the franchise's classic side-scrolling roots. However, instead of a single title, the game was divided into a duo of episodes, concluding with 2012's Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. However, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 was intended to be a trilogy of installments before producer Takashi Iizuka announced that Episode 2 would be the final installment for the foreseeable future. In 2015, former Sega digital brand manager Ken Barlow confirmed that there were indeed plans for Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 3, as evidenced by unused text alluding to a sequel being found in the game's code. Barlow did not provide an exact reason for why Episode 3 was quietly cancelled by Sega, observing that a third episode would most likely never see a release. player reception towards the first two chapters was sort of…
Nah, exactly.
which may explain why Sonic's first big 2D return to form remains woefully incomplete years later. Thanks to impeccable design choices on the development team's part, Sonic Mania looks near identical to the original Genesis trilogy, so much so that you'd be forgiven for mistaking it as a copy and pasted sprite sequel. The reality is anything but. These sorry fellows had to replicate everything you see by hand.
Yeah, right.
From the textures to the physics to the quirky and vibrant animations, absolutely everything you see is custom remade for Sonic Mania. That high-octane, spiraling ascent Sonic launches into after hitting a spring might look identical to the one in Sonic CD, but it most certainly wasn't lifted directly from the game that first saw its appearance. No, in fact, every detail was painstakingly recreated by Christian Whitehead and his all-star development team in the service of cooking up a throwback game for the ages. Whether or not you realized it, the Western run of Sonic X wasn't the original version of the show. 4Kids, the distributor of the series in North America, made sure to tweak plenty of things to appeal to, quote, Western sensibilities, even though some of the changes seemed downright random. However, there were some things that just weren't going to fly when crossing the culture gap. Case in point, any shots of Amy Rose's panties, Rouge's breasts, and literally any audio-based instance of realistic gunshots. There were even some instances of naughty words in the Japanese version. Back when Sonic Lost World was the franchise's hot new release, people could hardly fathom the DLC the game was touting. A Knight's level?
Nice.
A Yoshi's Woolly World level?
Inconceivable!
But then, after no one thought it could get any better, the world collectively lost its mind when Sega revealed that the final DLC level would be none other than a Hyrulean, Legend of Zelda-themed adventure.
What?
People were blown away by the idea of Sonic's and Link's worlds crossing paths. Yet, for all the excitement surrounding this expansion, they'd be remiss to declare this a groundbreaking event. See, Sonic and Link, heck, Sonic and Hyrule as a whole, have already met before. In the Super Smash Bros. Brawl dimension-hopping campaign mode Subspace Emissary, Sonic doesn't just meet Link and Zelda, he saves their lives. So when you see him dashing around Hyrule and interacting with its denizens in Lost World, remember, it's not the first time he's had to rescue them from dark forces. Sonic the Hedgehog is known as the brand that created such snappy phrases as
You're too slow!
as well as the oh-so-memeable
Gotta go fast!
And with those phrases in mind, it's clear that the franchise is keenly focused on one thing – speed. Blazing over vast stretches of land in the blink of an eye and breaking the sound barrier are just everyday occurrences for this hedgehog, leaving you to wonder, is there ever such a thing as too fast? Believe it or not, there used to be. While Sonic can no longer outspeed his games, that wasn't the case in 1994. In Sonic 3 specifically, some of the level geometry negatively reacted to Sonic's physics set, and could, provided the right circumstances, result in speeds too rip-roaringly fast for even the Genesis, with all its blast processing to keep up with. This typically ended with Sonic blazing through textures and bypassing portions of levels entirely. While this might sound like a nifty shortcut to be utilized by speedrunners, the reality is it could throw Sonic so far ahead of the layout that it'd often clip out of the level entirely and die. Or worse yet, end up somewhere game-breaking. The moral of this story? If you've got to go fast, be responsible about it. Sonic. Just say that name to yourself a few times and see how it glides off the tongue, how effortlessly cool it is.
Oh, honey, it's sexy.
Now instead, how about Mr. Needlemouse?
Nah.
Doesn't quite have the same ring to it, right? Well, it seems the Hedgehog's creators eventually came around to the same decision. Nevertheless, it was a work-in-progress name for Sonic formulated by none other than the character's own designer, Naoto Oshima. Mr. Needlemouse technically translates to Mr. Hedgehog in Japanese, so if nothing else, they got Sonic's last name right from the start. Sega followed up the enormous success of the original Sonic the Hedgehog game with the 1992 sequel, the appropriately named Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The console version of the game was released on November 21, 1992. But a few weeks before the console launch, an early build of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was among the featured games in the short-lived Nickelodeon competition show Nick Arcade. This early version of the game was shown off in the show's final 4 episodes, with the television series concluding on November 6, 1992. The prototype used for Nick Arcade was eventually shared online in 2006, allowing gamers to get a closer look at the build than the brief looks allowed on Nick Arcade. Several assets from the original Sonic the Hedgehog were recycled in this version, and numerous glitches are present. Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles are technically speaking 2 separate games, but what if we told you they're actually one big game, both in concept and execution?
But you don't have to take my word for it.
That's right, take it from Takashi Iizuka himself, who discussed the factors that went into the decision to halve Sonic 3 during a hefty interview with Game Informer. Iizuka cited multiple factors that forced the split, with the most crushing being the development team's deadline. Focusing efforts to craft the most ambitious Sonic game yet, the team wasn't prepared to meet Sega's strict deadlines, imposed to order to tie in with an unanticipated McDonald's promotion. That, coupled with the fact that the game's levels were larger and more plentiful, compounded the time issue while simultaneously leading to another roadblock, that being that the game was becoming too big for Sega's cartridges at the time. All this led the team to split Sonic 3 in half, making the second portion of it, Sonic & Knuckles, a separate game with the ability to lock onto the Sonic 3 cartridge. This feature enabled the post-launch reunification of Sonic Team's original vision for Sonic 3, and resulted in a happy ending for everyone involved. Allowing the team to meet their ambitious goal, Sega reaped the profits of 2 separate games, and the fans got to experience everything the developers had originally intended. Over the years and between various mainline entries, Sega sought to find ways to take its flagship property into more creative directions with its spin-off titles. One of the more off-kilter spin-off series launched in 2007, and was branded by Sega as the Sonic Storybook series due to its literary inspirations. Starting with Sonic and the Secret Rings on the Nintendo Wii, the spin-off series came to a quiet end in 2009, with Sonic and the Black Knight also released for the Wii. Although no other titles in the Storybook series were unveiled to the public, there were early plans for the spin-off line to be a full trilogy. Weeks after Black Knight launched, Sega conducted a public poll to gauge which genre fans would want a third Storybook game to be set in. This was followed by a 2011 presentation by Sega Mexico, during which a company representative also alluded to plans for a follow-up to Black Knight. Ultimately, the project was shelved entirely, and both Storybook games were quietly delisted from retailers by Sega. Everyone knows about the console version of Sonic Unleashed. It introduced boost gameplay to 3-dimensional environments and was generally a fun time. What people don't know is that during the very same release window, lurking in the shadows of its big brother was a reject, a deformed creature born of corporate greed and lack of imagination. This well-kept secret of the Sonic franchise remained under lock and key for years, until just recently. Behold, the 9th wonder of the world, the mobile port of Sonic Unleashed. This port received so little press that few even knew of its existence, and fewer yet decided to actually purchase it. Which, though expected for a game of such minimal effort and fanfare, might actually be a shame, as the release got a few decent reviews.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Point is that no one knew this thing existed, and most people still don't. As one of the most recognizable video game franchises of all time and boasting decades worth of titles, Sonic the Hedgehog has acquired many notable fans across its history. One of the most surprising of all is legendary filmmaker John Carpenter, a self-professed fan of the franchise since the 90s. Initially buying the game for his young son, Carpenter found himself drawn to playing the game himself, and especially appreciated its vibrantly engaging musical score. Considering its penchant for musical composition, that seems to make sense. Although frustrated by the game's difficulty and occasional lack of saves, especially in the underwater levels, Carpenter continues to be a longtime fan of the series. Decades later, Carpenter still keeps up with the Sonic the Hedgehog games, and even enjoys some of the more critically divisive titles in the franchise, including Sonic Unleashed. And considering he's the visionary behind horror classics like Halloween and The Thing, Carpenter's appreciation of the werewolf-themed 2008 entry makes a little more sense. Ever since 2010's Xbox 360 racing game Sonic Free Riders, the Blue Speedster has been voiced by prolific actor Roger Craig Smith. His voice might be familiar to animation fans who recognize him from heroic roles such as Captain America and Batman. Across various games and the 2014 animated series Sonic Boom, Smith became a favorite among fans for his performance as the character. And though Smith initially announced plans to leave the role in 2021, leaving Sonic without a voice in his console adventures, fan support is what kept him in the role for the foreseeable future. After Smith tweeted his intention to leave the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise to pursue other career opportunities, fans rallied online, voicing their hopes that Smith would remain in the role. Shortly after, Smith tweeted a response, thanking the fans for their support and confirming he would continue to voice Sonic in future projects featuring the character. The full circumstances behind Smith's intended departure are still unknown, but the vocal fan support seems to have played a major role in reversing the decision. After starring in 2 acclaimed video game adaptations, Ben Schwartz has been praised for his performance in bringing the beloved icon to cinematic life. However, while Schwartz has since received rave reviews for his role, he was not among the initial round of actors considered for the part by Paramount Pictures. An alleged internal casting shortlist from 2017 was leaked to the public in 2018 for Sonic and his human friend in the film, Sheriff Tom Wachowski, who was ultimately played by actor James Marsden. Schwartz and Marsden are glaringly absent from the shortlist for either role, while several interesting alternates are included in the lineup. Among the most notable suggestions for Sonic are Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, both of which would go on to star in different video game adaptations, Uncharted and Super Mario Bros. Respectively. Judging by the success of Schwartz's performance, it's hard to imagine anyone else voicing the Blue Blur.
Nailed it.
It goes to show that first picks for a role aren't always the perfect fit. And let's be honest, if he hadn't gotten the role, that would have been just
The world.
one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the entire Sonic franchise is whether or not the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, contributed to the soundtrack for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. According to rumors and online speculation, Sega worked with Jackson to compose a soundtrack, only to ultimately scrap his contributions after the pop star faced abuse allegations in 1993. Jackson's tour director, Brad Buxer, echoed that Jackson contributed tracks to the Sonic the Hedgehog 3 soundtrack, but was unsure if any of his work remained in the finished game. Sega's leadership had publicly refused to directly comment on the matter of any involvement from Jackson in the video game series. In 2022, the original game's lead programmer, Yuji Naka, appeared to allude to Jackson contributing to the Sonic the Hedgehog 3 soundtrack, but he later backtracked to these comments, citing a translation error on Twitter. While the extent of Jackson's involvement with the Sonic franchise remains a mystery, it has built up a gaming legend of its own that has lasted for years. After Sega pulled out of the console wars following the relative failure of the Dreamcast, the company began a prosperous partnership with Nintendo. In addition to a new era of Sonic games being released on Nintendo consoles, Sonic and Nintendo's Mario would team up for a series of sport-related crossover titles. During the production of Mario and Sonic at the 2012 Olympic Games for the Wii, the developers received an interesting note about how Sonic should be depicted. While designing swimwear for each of the playable characters in the 2011 sporting crossover game, director Eigo Kasahara revealed that Sega insisted that Sonic never remove his signature shoes, including when participating in aquatic activities, favoring his usual iconic fashion over practical function. The irony is that, as we mentioned earlier, Sonic can't swim. But the developers did figure a way around that piece of Sonic trivia, as he is the only character depicted with a cute little life vest to help him stay afloat.